Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session of the Berkeley Forum. My name is Aparna Iyer. I'm currently the president of the organization, and we're incredibly excited to welcome you to tonight's event, a panel on the past, present, and future of the Black Lives Matter movement. Before we begin, a quick reminder to our audience, please fill out the attendance form at tinyurl.com/BLM attendance and submit questions for one of our moderators to read aloud at tinyurl.com/BLM questions. Additionally, we'd like to provide a thanks to the Black Recruitment and Retention Center at Berkeley for all that they did to partner with us on this event and for their contributions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nazak Waliali, and I'm the political director for the Black Recruitment and Retention Center this year. Just a little bit about us. We are a student-initiated and entirely student-run organization, and we were founded in 1983, so we've been around for a minute. The purpose of the BRC is to supplement, expand, and create efforts on campus and within the community towards the recruitment and retention of Black students. We are one of 7 other recruitment and retention centers in the Bridges Multicultural Resource Center, which is a coalition of 8 organizations. And we serve as one of the 3 pillars of the Black Student Triad, which is the African American Student Development Office, alongside the Black Student Union. And we advocate for Black students on and off campus at UC Berkeley. We're incredibly excited to be a part of this effort, and we really hope that y'all enjoy the event today.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to it as well. And one more thing before we begin, the Berkeley Forum would like to take the time to acknowledge that our events and UC Berkeley's campus sit on the territory of the Ohlone people, and it's important to us to recognize this as we benefit from the continued occupation of this land, and because the Muwekma Ohlone people are still alive and present within the Bay Area and Berkeley today. For more Native education resources on campus, we encourage you to look to the Center for Educational Justice and Community Engagement. Thank you. I'd now like to invite up our moderator for the evening, Omatara Aloye, to introduce the speakers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight's session of the Berkeley Forum, a panel on the past, present, and future of the Black Lives Matter movement. The format of this event will be as follows. I will introduce each of our speakers one by one, and they will present a brief 3-minute overview of their position before we move on to a moderating portion. Our first speaker of the night is Anthony James Williams. Anthony James Williams is a current UCLA Ph.D. candidate in sociology and UC Berkeley graduate. In 2016, they led a pivotal role in advocating for the UC system divestment from private prisons. In addition, their academic research examines the use of discretion in California prisons and how systems of power are both maintained and resisted with the focus on Blackness, racism, race, and ethnicity. They also co-created and popularized the Twitter hashtags, #MasculinitySoFragile, and #BlackWomenDidThat.
Thank you for the introduction, Omatara. Hi, y'all. My name is Anthony, and just so you know, I'm using the trans flag as my background in commemoration of Trans Day of Visibility, which is today. And I'm going to use my time to read a section from the official updated statement from Samaria Rice, mother of Tamir Rice, Lisa Simpson, mother of Richard Risher, and the collective. So I'm going to start now, and I'll let you know when I finish. After Tamir and Richard were murdered, when we had to bury our sons, we didn't see Black lives or matter. Our DNA changed when our sons were murdered. It took breath out of our bodies. When y'all go home, y'all chant Black Lives Matter. When we go home, we miss our sons. We don't need y'all to stand in front of us to tell our story. We need y'all to stand in back of us and lift us up. If your agenda is not about helping our children, men, and women, then get out our fight. Enough is enough. We released a public statement that expressed our concerns with Tamika D. Mallory, Sean King, Benjamin Crump, Lee Merritt, Patrisse Cullors, Melina Abdullah, and the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation to stop capitalizing off our loved ones, and we call on the people to join our fight for accountability. And I'm jumping down to the end of the statement. After Patrisse Cullors, Sean King, and Tamika D. Mallory reached out to Samaria Rice requesting to meet with her, it was decided that we will accept a meeting with Patrisse Cullors from the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation and Tamika D. Mallory from Until Freedom, promoting an intramural focus on the mothers and Black communities en masse. We also extend an invitation to Melina Abdullah to attend the meeting. That's the end of that. And if you want to read more about their desired goals and the rest of the statement, you can visit deshawnlh.medium.com. That's DASHAWNLH SHAUNL as in love, H as in hair, .medium.com. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Our second speaker for the night is Bethelehem Yirga. Beth Yirga fought on the front lines of educational equity for 10 years as a special education teacher and founding school leader. Beth is one of the 3 co-founders of the PALM Collective, currently with the role of lead organizer and chief strategist. The PALM Collective is a Black-led organization connecting individuals, networks, and grassroots organizations to end systemic racism in DC and beyond while creating powerful communities through collective action. Beth is also a founding partner at Movement Catalyst, a social movement support hub based in Washington, DC, working nationally and locally.
Thank you, Parks. And I am so honored to be here. I ground my organizing, and even when I was an educator, I ground everything that I do in who I am, and I feel as though that pays homage to my ancestors who fought for me to become who I am, and for my daughter who's 3 years old, and me attempting to create the world that she deserves and that deserves her. And so I say that to say I come to you all today on Piscataway land in Washington, D.C., and occupy Piscataway land. And I say that I'm a Black, queer, single mom who wakes up every day imagining that it is possible to reimagine our societies and our world. And so I bring that to you all today on how it's beautifully shared. It is Trans Awareness Day. And I honor you all by authentically standing in who I am and organizing from that space. And so, yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be along my co-panelists and bring all that I have to this to share in community and in knowledge.
Thank you. Our third and final speaker for the night is Nayela Idari. Nayela Idari is the co-founder of Freedom March NYC, a youth protest and policy group on the front lines pushing for reform in New York City and nationally. Nayela has been involved in activism from an early age, having served in the role of Midwest Youth Director for renowned national civil rights organization, the National Action Network. Nayela has had the privilege of speaking on youth activism during the National Action Network's annual conference, Yale's Black Solidarity Conference, and the Black Women's Roundtable. Most recently, Nayela worked in the office of the highest ranking African American in Congress, Majority Whip of the House of Representatives, Jim Clyburn, and in the office of New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer.
Hi guys, I'm so happy to be here today with you all. I am coming to you all from New York. As Beth mentioned, it is International Transgender Day of Visibility, and my co-founder and the rest of my team, they're actually out protesting and having a celebration, so I'm kind of jealous. They're in the streets, and the New York City organizers, like Stonewall, they're always dancing, lots of energy. I'm a little bit jealous, but I'm happy to be here with you all today, and hopefully you guys can take something back, donate to a trans organization locally in your neighborhood. For me, that would be Stonewall and DC Black Trans Funds. And that is it. I guess you'll hear the rest of what I have to say during the panel. Just want to make sure that we recognize that I am a leader, but this is a leaderful movement, and there's so many people who are the reason why I'm here today, and people who may not be on this panel, but they are doing the work. And I encourage you all, if you're listening to us, there's someone who is like us in your communities, so please reach out and do your research.
Thank you for all of your addresses. We will now be moving into the moderating portion of the event, where I will be asking questions to all of your speakers, and we will alternate as you provide your answers. So this is a panel about the past, present, and future of the Black Lives Matter movement. So to kick things off, the movement building project of Black Lives Matter began as a hashtag created by 3 women identifying Black organizers in 2013. What, if anything, distinguishes Black Lives Matter from other Black liberation movements? And whoever wants to jump in can start.
Well, I would say the main difference is just the use of social media. We're able to share something. I can see what's going on in Minneapolis or Milwaukee that wouldn't have been able to be as easily spread as before. And the fact that we are digitally organizing, so everybody's not outside. And if you are outside, you're finding a lot of that information from Instagram. And in 2014, it was Facebook groups. And we're just constantly evolving to whatever the social media medium is that people are using.
I would echo Nayela. I would just want to add that I think what was implicit in what she was saying is there's a lot of things that come with that. And so, there's just a movie about Fred Hampton and COINTELPRO. And what we see now is this being the first movement with social media being as large as it has. It also means that there's been a lot of surveillance, both like within the movement and from outside the movement. And there's always been surveillance. That's not new. Black people, since we arrived in this country, have been surveilled. That's our experience. And what I mean is that it's a new form of surveillance. And so the statement that I read earlier, it's a trip because you sometimes, or I'll speak for myself, I and many people I know will know the names of these Black folks who have been killed by the police, right? Often Black men, not always Black women, especially not Black trans women, but don't always know the names of the mothers, right? And what they're doing. And we'll know the names of some of the movement founders or the leaders. And as Nayela said, it's a leaderful movement. And I think there have been moments when we've seen that it does not feel as leaderful. When you're in the work, it's different. But if you're just watching from the sidelines, you only know of a few people. And so I think that the way that social media has played into that has been really very different from in the past, just because we can reach so many people internationally. Whether the person doing the work is online or not, all of it ends up online and then gets shared across the world.
And do you mind, I want to make sure that I encompass my answer with all parts of the question. Can you repeat it for me one more time?
Yes, the movement building project of Black Lives Matter began as a hashtag created by 3 women-identifying Black organizers in 2013. What, if anything, distinguishes Black Lives Matter from other Black liberation movements?
That's a good question. What, if anything, distinguishes Black Lives Matter from other Black liberation movements? I do want to kind of shout out that it kind of gave a space to reignite and build community at a time where a lot of communities were kind of fighting within silos, and creating that network and getting the attention that it deserved nationally definitely distinguishes like the Black Lives Matter movement and that space and like building that coalition. And even today, like I just came from organizing a Black liberation youth and Indigenous rights youth that are like fighting for their own. The youth that are fighting for Line 3 in Dapo are here in DC demanding change. And I think because of the foundational work that has been laid by Black Lives Matter, we were able to do that cross work because some of the Black Lives Matter movement leaders were a part of helping build those gaps, and we're pulling up to Standing Rock and we're pulling up to spaces and kind of showcasing that solidarity as a Black liberation movement. What it has evolved to, what it's going through, there's a lot. As an organizer who works with the locals and the national, there's a lot of conversation of what's, what kind of it's evolving to and what those conversations are. But it did open a beautiful pathway for us modern organizers to build those bridges and communities, and to see it happening in real life is really brilliant. And that's from the foundation foundational relationships from that era of connection.
Beth, you brought up this sort of modern organizer and being able to build those bridges. And through the civil rights movement and Black Power movement, they're credited with expanding protections and voting rights for Black Americans. And advocates recognize that these issues of systemic racism continue to persist. What, if anything, can be learned and taken from the success and failures of past Black liberation movements, and how do you see it being used in this one?
I'll jump off mute to answer so that everyone can hear me, and appreciate you seeing a connection to that. I'm bringing this awesome question out of there. I think there's so much to learn, right? Like as an educator, and as a motto of my Ethiopian mother, she would always say, find the good in everything, even in the worst possible situation, find the good. And I think looking back to our history and looking back to the civil rights movement and pulling out like what was done really well is a huge part of the journey, and definitely doesn't force us to recreate the wheel when it was already kind of in motion. And so I say what I appreciated and what I learned and took from the successes and failures of that is to be open to them, to be open to evolving, right? Like Black Lives Matter is now evolving to Black liberation. And what that looks like and how we move together is going to allow that movement to grow and be stronger together. Only if we're willing to learn our lessons together and move together from it. Like, shout out to Ant for reading that declaration at the beginning about Tamir Rice and the mothers, right? That's showcasing transformative justice in real time, right? Like, I'm calling you out. Let's have this conversation. Let's talk about the harm and let's work through it, right? Like, these are the beginnings of showcasing what's possible, and that's through constant ability to evolve and learn from our past situations, and being honest and open about it. So yeah, I think we're still, like, even from the civil rights movement, even just recently from like what's going on now, right? Welcoming that into the space. Yeah.
Oh, do we just popcorn it? Okay, so one of the things that we've learned is that you can help out your own, like you don't need to rely on government assistance. And an example of that would be the Black Panther free breakfast program and how that ended up being a government program. And something else, the failures, they were also sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, and violent against women. And I would say we don't really have to take that anymore. We call people out, we hold people accountable. If there are abusers at the forefront of this movement, we make sure that we check them and that let them know that they aren't welcome in this space. And also in the past, Black women, trans women, and queer people have always been a part of these spaces, but have always been amplified. And I would say now that their voices are more amplified, or at least the community is making sure that we support each other. So I know that today I just got an award, but there were no trans women who were awarded, but let me make sure that I announce like what this day is and what event that we're going to understand that even though if like I'm being amplified, I'm passing the mic or uplifting someone else who people may not know, because that's what this movement is coalition building, and we can learn from the failures of the past that this ain't that and we're not doing that anymore.
I would echo what both of my co-panelists said, everything they said, and then specifically Beth's point, we do not have to recreate the wheel. That's the first thing I think of. Nayela's point about the misogyny, the trans antagonism, the queer phobia, all that, which still exists in the movement today, but in less, on like it's less prevalent because we're willing to check things, but it's still there all the time. The third thing I think of is that it was never about one leader and it never will be about one leader. So earlier to Nayela's point about a leaderful movement. The fourth is the power of the everyday. So when I think about Mamie Till and her showing Emmett Till's body, right, which should not be compared to the way that we've been forced images of Black people dying, right? It's so much so that sometimes they're gifts. That is not the same thing. When she did that, that was the first time that people had really seen the violence against Black people internationally, and in its ugliest form, in the way that Emmett Till was massacred. And so having the open casket and then that getting reported on, that was a big watershed moment. And then the power of the everyday, there's the sanitation worker strike, which also did a lot of this, right? So like, going back to the earlier point, there is no one leader. And we see that with like the Amazon strikes too. There's a Black man in New York. I can't recall his name. If y'all remember it, you could shout it out or put it in the chat and I can mention it. But he was doing that work, but he's doing that work with a whole lot of other people, right? The fifth point is that we don't all have to like each other to work toward freedom. And we saw that because with previous Black liberation movements, the Panthers didn't always, there were different chapters of the Panthers. The Panthers did not always get around with like the Black Liberation Army, right? There are different ways to go about freedom and to go about liberation. And so we don't all have to like each other. We just have to respect each other's work and each other, which doesn't always happen, but that's something. And the last one is that we see that they're coming out of the previous movements. We saw some people go into leadership positions that were either political or economic or both. And we have learned and knew then, but we're relearning that Black capitalism will not save us, right? That Black studies will not save us, that just adding Black to something is not gonna save us. So we know and we knew that just because we get somebody Black in a position of power, if it, for example, is the president of the United States, that's not gonna save Black people, right? And there was a lot of us who, when Obama was elected, I was like 18 or something, 18 or 19. And I had a certain vision, right? I had an ideal, and that did not come to pass. In fact, Obama was telling us that Africa, the continent, and the countries in the continent were to blame for their own problems, and that we Black folks basically need to pull our pants up here. So like this idea that one individual Black person, or that a Black person in power, or that if we change the leadership to Black leadership, but we still exist under capitalism, that's not going to save us. So I think that those are things that we've learned from both the mistakes and the successes. And I think and I hope that we continue to learn, because one thing I know is when I was organizing as a student at Berkeley, I wasn't always as cognizant of the history of Black students organizing on campus. And I think I would have done some things differently had I done that work. But like most of us, I was also trying to be a student and work and exist. And that means that a lot of juggling, it means juggling a lot of things at the same time.
You all brought up such interesting topics, and I definitely have tons of questions surrounding them. But moving towards the present or today's times, civic and analytic polls estimated that between 15 and 26 million people in the United States participated in Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the summer of 2020, suggesting that they were part of the largest movement in US history. How, if at all, did last summer's protests mark a shift in Black Lives Matter? And what were the implications of this shift?
I don't have a thought yet, but y'all both seem ready. So I just want one of y'all to go. You both, the face is telling me you have thoughts.
I was hoping that you would go first.
I can if you really want me to, but I saw your head. I saw it,
Like I have a thought, but I'm like, you go first. Maybe I have some more thoughts.
I can go first. Work off of each other. I would say that how, if at all, did last summer's protests mark a shift in BLM? I see it as a second wave of consciousness. So the first wave was in 2014 with Mike Brown when he was killed. And that launched a lot of people, Black people in particular, into questioning a lot of things, right? We started to shift our politics, and some of us had really radical politics and then just started speaking up a bit more. And some of us had more liberal politics and then realized that that wasn't gonna save us either. So the second wave, the 2020, summer 2020 it's a second wave of of consciousness raising for all generations. And so folks who didn't get with the program the first time are now getting more with it. But what I will say is that we have less space for performative activism and performative organizing. And we've seen that this time around, right? So we see that now 7 years later, the mothers are like, y'all are not gonna profit off of our sons' names, you know, and our children's names. And we see that people are calling people out and in. And one of the things I found in you know, I was very active on Twitter from 2014 until last year, until 2020, no longer on there. And one of the things that people kept talking about was like, well, we can't critique in public, right? Because we as Black people are already being surveilled. We as Black people are already trying. And so there was a certain amount of like, we have to critique in private spaces. And it's like, for me, what I'm noticing now is we're more willing to say, no, I came to you in private. You didn't want to handle it in private, so let's handle it in public, right? Or you did this in public, so let's handle it in public. So that's the big thing. But what I what I will say is the shift. So that's the shift, is the second wave of consciousness. The repetition is that non-Black people are still doing the same things. They're still doing things where they blame Black people for our victim blaming, survivor blaming, blame Black people for our own problems, where they're like, you know what, Naila, can you teach me? You know what I mean? Like, Beth, can you teach me? Instead of going and finding things themselves, when there's so many resources, right? We see the proliferation of like the reading list, which, you know, I'll give a small tidbit. I'm a grad student, right? And I joined the Afro-Pessimism reading group. And it was a bunch of folks, mostly non-Black. And I was like curious about what it would be like. And at one point, I realized there were like multiple white people who went, and one person, she talked about how she was learning hip hop and like learning a little bit more about Black people. And like, so Afro-pessimism kind of sounded interesting. And there's like a way that like, the reason I'm touching my face like that is there's a way it's like we just become commodified and fetishized and collapsed. And so it's like, yeah, Black Lives Matter, I'll wear it on my mask, or I'll wear it on my shirt, or I'll do this, but like, what are you materially doing for Black people? And so like, there's been more of a shift for people to demand that of people, but there is a repetition of non-Black people, and that's not just white people, I mean non-Black people in general, doing a certain amount of performance that I'm like, y'all are tired? Yeah, you know, you're not tired of this? And so like, that's where that's the next shift, is I want, because we are already amongst ourselves as Black people working together to figure some stuff out. And I want non-Black people to work amongst themselves to figure it out. That's not to say they aren't already. There are people who are doing that, but I want more. I want more of that.
Okay, he has provided the thought. Thank you, Anne. For me, I would say what really happened is this is the first time that the world was entirely still. I know in New York, in May, we're still locked down, and a lot of, like, there weren't any sports, like, there was nothing going on. So when George Floyd happened, everyone was watching it. I don't watch, you know, trauma or any of that stuff, but a lot of people had saw it. It was shared everywhere. People who didn't support Black Lives Matter in 2014, all of a sudden were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like this is what Black people go through, because the world was still, and that was the only thing that they saw and that was being shared. So it's been, my answer would be it's been a little bit more acceptable, which was a little bit weird for me because I was outside in 2014 where people still weren't comfortable saying like Black Lives Matter, just all lives matter. And then 2020, every clothing brand posted the Black square, it's posting something. So it's definitely been a shock. If you lived in 2014, you'd say, oh, okay. Now, what are we in 2021, the spring of 2021, I'm still just sitting back and taking in, like, if people learned or if they just posted their Black squares, what do we know? Let's see what happens May 31st when the anniversary comes up, or what are they saying right now during the trials? I think this is the time to see if anything happened or people really changed their mindset. I think because of the year that we were in last year, people were just moving and were outside, but now we can see if they actually took it in.
So shout out to my co-panelists for sharing so much of you so I could think through. And I agree on so many different levels. And I want to jump in with what Naila said about being still. And I think in that, a lot of us were able to, I can speak to my experience during quarantine. I very much centered myself and grounded myself and poured into myself so much because the world was still that my cup was flowing over. And so I say that to say that the self-care was such a high priority. I think when the murder of George Floyd hit, I was just like, this is what I'm pouring into. This is what I'm going to, like, I wholeheartedly believe that this is wrong, and I'm willing to jump into that. And also, I think, and it also showed me a priority, right? Like, as a full-time organizer now, right? Like, when I started this journey, I was a math teacher who had just transitioned to teaching math online. And I'd been teaching and being an educator and a school leader for 10 years. And I was ignited, right? Like, I was activated. And I brought all those skills that I utilized in education to fight for liberation through the lens of education for Black and Brown students. And I brought that into the space, right? I think one of the things that was really beautiful about jumping into this full time in DC was like seeing, I had doctors and lawyers next to me and professors and people that work in, like, the space that I'm at right now is like a safe house that we used all summer for protesting. And like the people that the essential workers here, like, we got so cool with them, we can come and go as we please, right? Like, the relationships, because everybody was believing in the fact that Black lives mattered, there were connections across the board. And people that came from so many different sectors and ways of life that it poured so many more skills into an already very connected community, and was able to just balloon it to showcase kind of like the solidarity. Like, in DC, we feel it. Like, even when other organizers come to our city and we're like, yo, welcome, like, you feel the solidarity of like across movement spaces. And I think that's because we were all still, and then we all saw it on the big, like, it's been happening, right? It's a part of our history and our DNA, right? Like, you know, I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, just for facts, like one of the richest African-American counties in the entire country, right outside of DC. And I went to one of the lowest performing schools in the state, right? Like, think about that, you know? But we learned our history. And so none of this is new for us, but like when the world was ignited, it allowed us to be very much more vocal about it and not just kind of push through and live through it for those of us that like were within the system. I feel like when we're fighting, we're somewhat outside of the matrix, which makes it a little bit more bearable, but it makes you even fight harder.
Okay, I had one quick thought, and then Beth gave me two more. One quick thought is that there's also been a push more toward abolition, because BLM in 2014, while some of us were abolitionists and pushing for abolition, many people were pushing for reform. And now there is a bigger push for the abolition of prisons, the abolition of police. And I also want to note that people are using words like abolition and we're not always considering exactly what that means, right? So that's been a interesting thing to watch when people call themselves abolitionists, but then are like, we'll lock this person up. And it's like, well, how does that work? How do we think about that, right? The second thing I will echo is from Beth. I do find that we're now more willing to do more breaks and engage in more collective care than we were in 2014. And then the third thing is to the question earlier about what's different. Now we have full-time organizers, which we did not have very often in the 1960s, for example, you know what I mean? And we definitely didn't have when people were trying to abolish slavery because they were full-time workers, if you want to call it that, slaves, right? And then they were also trying to do some other work on the side. And then like white abolitionists, that wasn't their full-time job either. So when I think about now hearing Beth say that, like there are people who that is your job, you know, like you are a full-time organizer, and what does that mean? Which we didn't always have those opportunities before. And so there's really great things and there's danger in that. So those are the three things that came to mind. I'm done for now.
Thank you. You all talked about it a little bit earlier, but within the framework of intersectionality, the experience of discrimination is compounded for those who identify with multiple minority groups. Particularly, how, if at all, has being a woman, non-binary, and/or queer or trans identifying informed your approaches to supporting the Black Lives Matter movement? And how do you combat and address these sort of inter-community issues, such as colorism, toxic Black masculinity, homophobia, transphobia, all the phobias within the Black Lives Matter movement?
I will start us off. My co-panelists have been gracious enough to go first. And this is really similar to a Zoom I had yesterday that and had a very similar question. And it really moved me to hear this because it's something that being a queer Black single mom and kind of jumping into a role as an organizer, as a connector. So understanding different organizations, different leaderful spaces, and understanding their journeys and their stories and trying to build collaboration and coalition across the DMV. I learned through this experience, and as an educator, that identifying myself, finding who I am, and standing in that, right? Like that's why I said at the beginning of this call is that I'm a queer Black single mom, because in that you'll understand what my social contract is. I'm hoping, right, in that initial identifying of like, hey, like I'm queer, I'm Black, I'm a single mother. Like I will understand the world from that context and lens, and I'm hoping that you will be in that connection with me because I shared who I am openly. And I say that to say when I go into spaces and identify myself, I keep my boundary. Like, oh, I'm a Black queer mom, a single mom. I you know, like I will be very frank and honest, especially as an educator. And it took me 2 years to transform a school through this, but the word, I don't even want to say it because you need a trigger warning. But it is FAGGOT, I will spell it. And the children and underserved, like it's just, I can't hold communities and children accountable for ignorance that is not their own, right? Like sometimes it is it is not through not understanding. It is through ignorance in sense of the oppressive systems and communities that they're in and the way that they've had to navigate to even survive. And so accountability to me is looking students in their face and be like, if you care about me as an educator, if you stand by someone you care about, and that word is offensive, and I am queer, like how do you help me stop that? That hurts me, you know? And when we can come from a place of understanding that people's ignorance is not of their own, of oppressive systems, and that people will learn if you hold your boundaries, and like I do not allow that word, right? Like I do not, those are my boundaries, and if you respect me as who I stand in this space to be, then please understand that. And I think through that comes education and knowledge, and the space for people to evolve, and be held accountable. Because like those words are damaging to relationships that you may care about investing in. And so I say that to say it's work. It's navigated to me as a redevelopment of the social contract, and it helps me. It helps, not even helps me, but it helps create spaces, brave spaces that we can have these conversations and learn from them and stand in our truths and be like, that's not cool. And okay, cool, I can hold you accountable. And if not, okay, well, this space is no longer a space that we can continue to thrive in, and that's okay. But if you want to come back here, you're gonna have to learn on your own. I'm not gonna teach you. We're not teaching you. That's not, we got Google for that. But I stand to my boundaries in every space that I go to, as a queer Black single mom.
Well, for us, I'm answering the last part of the question, particularly how, if at all, has being a woman informed your approaches to support the Black Lives Matter movement? Well, for us at Freedom March NYC, we actually only work with the Black women organizers of other organizations. So the organization could be co-ed or whatever. We only work with Black women and Black trans women specifically. So some of the issues that people have, we don't quite have because we don't mess with those people. And even if we're doing something, like if we're organizing something on behalf of a man who lost his life, it's still Black women like we call it, like we have a coalition of Black women organizers of all different organizations across New York City, and we do that for a reason. And in terms of issues addressing like, you know, colorism, homophobia, transphobia, one with homophobia and transphobia, we do call that out because of who's in our space. But in terms of like colorism, I am a light-skinned woman. Fortunately, I'm also very shy in public spaces, so I'm never the person who is putting myself in front of people. So I don't have an issue of like trying to center myself all the time, because I just stay in the back, and at protests, I just make sure that things are running on time. But we do make sure that we are calling that out. There are some people who, maybe because of their light skin, they could be marching alongside a dark-skinned person, but all the pictures are of that person just right in front, which has happened. And like Ant mentioned earlier, it's call out and call in. If somebody calls you in, just understanding that's not an insult, it's a learning moment. But fortunately for us, a lot of these issues we don't have, because everybody's like, we're kind of here and we're comfortable with calling each other in or checking someone, or like the light-skinned girl who was in all the pictures, she's okay with decentering herself or giving some more opportunities for other Black women organizers to have photo shoots, so they have press and interviews, because she understands that she's getting a lot of attention because of how she looks. And I do the same. If there's like, Cosmo reached out to me and I passed it along to my friend so she could start writing for them. So just sharing opportunities.
I love what they said. One thing that in 2016, I was doing a thesis at Berkeley on Black women and self-care, and it turned out, and specifically who were members of or organizing with Black Lives Matter, like the global network. And at the time, there were like 35, 40 chapters. It wasn't what it is now, or as large as it is. And one of the things I found is a lot of it was about collective care. And one of the quotes I found, that I found was by Frances Beale, and I used it in my thesis, and I ended up getting tattooed on me in 2017. And she writes, "To die for the revolution is a one-shot deal. To live for the revolution means taking on the more difficult commitment of changing our day-to-day life patterns." And over the last years, I have really shifted how, as like, I am Black, I am queer, and I'm non-binary. And I have been out about being queer since I was 17, and I've been out about being non-binary since I was, I don't know the age, but in 2017, so I was like 27, 28, 31 now. And I think I used to hurt a lot. I used to feel a lot of pain because I would see the way that people would show up for Black men, Black cis men, because even when it's a Black trans man, people just don't show up the same way. So I saw the way that people showed up when it was a Black cis man versus when it was, I remember particularly in Oakland, and that's where I am now. I was in Oakland and I was at an action in downtown Oakland. And then it was a few weeks later, and it was a Say Her Name action, which was, Say Her Name was created specifically to talk about the Black women victims of police violence, right? And the amount of people, it was like a quarter of the people. It was just so sparse. And when you have, and that's fine, you don't always need a lot of people, but when you have less people, it's easier to get kettled, right? Like it's easier to get knocked off, blocked off in the streets. It's easier for them to essentially knock you out, right? Because sometimes you just need those numbers. And I remember watching it, and what I've had to learn over the years as someone who is perceived, right? People assume that I'm a man and read me as a man. I've had to learn to step back sometimes, even though I identify as non-binary. And I've also had to learn to take things less personal, because the pain that I felt, like when Pulse happened, when the people were killed in Florida, it was wild to see who really showed up, like who of my folks who I thought like were comrades, who I thought were like ride or die or whatever at the time, who was really there for me and for other people when these, like all these people, some of whom were Black, some of whom weren't, but got killed for being queer. And it's a trip to see how one of the beautiful things about BLM being as accepted, quote unquote, as it is now, as Nayela was saying earlier, is that now we also see people talking about Black trans lives matter, right? And if it's not Black trans this, and if it's not Black trans that, then I'm not with it. Whereas before you could say Black lives matter, but really I'm only talking about the men, right? And people would still organize with you. And that was less explicit, but it was sometimes, right? And Naila just wrote a message, they stay co-opted and say her name. And it was wild to watch it happen in real time, because say her name became say his name and say their names. And I was like, y'all, like it was made specifically for Black women. Like, can they not just have this space? So in terms of the question, how does it affect me? Baby, I have to take things less personal, because the way my feelings have been hurt, oh, it's not it. It's not it. You can't do that. And then the second question about like, how do I combat and address those issues? One, I take it less personally. And two, like Naila was saying, I stick to my people. There was the 2016 Anthony was like, okay, well, you're in my circle. And like, I'm going to try to like, maybe like convince you a little bit, right? I'm going to try to bend you this way. And now I'm like, well, baby, if you don't want to, then why would I force you? So I'm going to stay with the people. I am actually going to stay in my little safe bubble. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to stay where I have people who I know got my back, who will use my pronouns. And when they mess up, they're going to be like, my bad, and then continue on. The people who are really there for me and there for Black trans women in particular, and Black trans women sex workers. And, you know, I could go on and on. Black disabled people, which we don't always talk about. I stay with them because I do not have the time, the energy, or the interest in trying to convince a bunch of people who need convincing. You know what I mean? Because at that point, it's a waste of my breath. It's a waste of my space. And it took me a long time to learn that. And I still sometimes have my hiccups, but generally I keep to my own. So that's not necessarily how I address it when it pops up, but it is how I've learned to address it by making sure it pops up very little. And when it does, I'm with people with whom they will call me out, or I can call them out, you know? Because if we can't do that, then why are we doing this work? Because that's not leading us to freedom. That's not leading us to liberation. It's not cute. It's not cute.
I love the topic of collective care and self-preservation that came up in the last answer. I really do feel like it's crucial to organizing. And Anthony, you brought up earlier the Fred Hampton movement, a movie, Judas and the Black Messiah, and considering the commercial incentive media companies have in ensuring that their product is palpable to a broad audience, some have argued that such media often sanitizes the stories of the Black movements they depict. How, if at all, can we balance the role of popular media and what it has in spreading Black Lives Matter's message while also preventing its potential dilution? If at all.
Okay, so it's always going to be sanitized. So like the way that I feel is we can't, period. So if you're in a position, if you're listening, watching this, whatever later, if you're in a position of power where you can change some of these narratives and you can make sure that Green Book doesn't, like censor a white man, and that the Fred Hampton story doesn't make the white man into a sympathetic ally, and doesn't, make something that was very revolutionary and make an assassination into like a hit film, right? And it's not that we can't make films about this, but my friend Joel Jenkins, we were just texting the other day, and it was like when Fruitvale Station came out about the murder of Oscar Grant, little did we know, although some people probably predicted, that would later become a genre, right? And I haven't quite figured out the best word for it, but like trauma porn is the word I use. I have some issues with it that people have raised up, but I'm tired of trauma porn, and mainstream media is always going to do that. And even sometimes independent media is going to do that. And so the question was how, if at all, can we balance the role popular media has in spreading BLM's message while also preventing its potential dilution? I don't know that there is a balance. I think that we need to have us as viewers, as consumers, need to have more discernment. And I find that that's already happening, right? People who used to stan artists, right, are now learning like, maybe I shouldn't put this artist on a pedestal because they're human, and also because they're a millionaire or a billionaire, and they actually don't care about me. You know, they don't actually care about these things. Or even if they do care, right, how are they showing it in their actions? So for me, it's always going to be diluted. And so like, it's less about how do we prevent that, and more about us keeping two things. It's us keeping our heads down and doing the work and not getting too distracted by that. And also recognizing that when something like that comes out, and my dad is in the military, I come from a military family. So like, there's times when they've, said some things where I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that, right? And so, but I can't just be like, well, Dad, this is wrong, or, whoever, this is wrong. So instead, we have to have some conversations about like, well, this movie can be an entry point, and then we can also talk about the ways that it has sanitized, in the way that it has made things comfortable. Because honestly, what it becomes is it's about white and non-Black consumption. It becomes about making our pain, that's why I say trauma porn, our pain becomes, and has been for quite some time, entertainment, right? Whether people recognize that or not. And I don't want that. And also, that's not where my energy goes. So instead, if that comes out, if I see it, if I'm talking to somebody, then we could pick it apart, or we could talk about things. But the prevention, as a PhD student and like a nobody, but a somebody, because we all somebodies, but a nobody, what I will say though is what we can do is we can write more. So like with Medium, with Twitter, with Substack, with WordPress, and all of their issues, we can just put things out into the world, so we can create more narratives as well and tell our stories in ways that we didn't always do before, so that there's more. But just because there's more doesn't mean that the mainstream media is still not going to be on their BS, I
guess even expanding more upon this topic, you talk about mainstream media. We can maybe include corporate engagement, but in response to last summer's Black Lives Matter protests, numerous companies, you all talked about the posting of the Black Square and messaging. They demonstrate their support through public statements and announcements of large-scale reforms, maybe some merchandise drops. How has such corporate engagement with Black Lives Matter have been perceived in the past? And do you think that there could be a space for corporate engagement in the movement, if at all?
So I'll go, and I'll be honest, and feel free to call in if y'all want, because I have done some things. But so, for example, we started working with Lululemon, but we worked with Lululemon because they saw my co-founder at a protest, and they asked, how can we support? We haven't did any advertisements like, hey, this is us at a protest. All they asked is like how we can support. And I think that if you can get support and you don't have to change what you're doing, you should do it. Those are my thoughts. And what I mean by not changing what you're doing is if you were fighting for defunding the police and now someone donates to your cause, and now you can no longer say that, then maybe that's not money that you should accept. But if you can do everything that you were already wanting to do and these people want to donate, then you should accept. But however, you should also look at who this money coming from, and if this is money that you can trace back, you're like, okay, I don't want to be associated with them, don't do that. And also, as someone who models, I make sure that when I'm doing something that is corporate or with a clothing brand, that it's separate or it's not performative. So for an example, most of my engagements this year have been for Women's History Month and not Black History Month, which to me, I think was a little bit better because it doesn't make it seem like, hey, look at this, Black Lives Matter person. It's more like, oh, woman empowerment, and then I can incorporate that in. And another thing that I have done is because we've been able to receive money, I don't know if it's because my co-founder and I went to Columbia, people like us, we seem like we can be palatable towards them. We also shift funds. So we have we've received money and we've given money to other organizers and other organizations. We've paid people's rents with the money that we've gotten. So we redistribute. And that was just my answer. I was just like, feel free to call in because I know people feel icky about this, but I'll be honest, I do take some money sometimes.
I'm laughing at you and antics in the chat. My experience of like the corporate engagement with BLM is kind of like it's layered, and it comes from a space of kind of seeing it through my friends and kind of what they're going through and their experiences, while at the same time seeing Black Lives Matter pop up in Target, right? Like I know the movement is like being co-opted when like there's whole sections in Target. But you know, in the sense of like thinking about gay rights, right? And being able to get marriage and gay rights, like you kind of had to choose a side, right? We had passive individuals. So this comes back to like the monetizing part, right? So we had a side. You had to be like, you could no longer like, you were either for gay marriage or you were not for gay marriage. Like there was no side not to be on. And when movements get to that space of like pick a side, because this is like, there's no way for you to like justify this any longer. We must pick a side. That it quickly becomes like June is now a month of spending celebrating queer lives by selling things that identify with like LGBTQIA lives. And like, I used to like June, right? Like when I was a young, you know, queer woman out in these streets, like I used to like, it was like my secret, right? Like you'd start seeing rainbow everywhere, and it was kind of like a kind of solidarity. But that's what happens when movements get into spaces where we are on the national stage. And unfortunately, that's when capitalism starts knocking at the door of that movement. That's when you know it's like, it's on that forefront, and that we are getting to a place where this will no longer be a passive state. Like you cannot say that I'm not I'm not anti-racist. Like you are or you are not. Like it's in the way you move, right? Like I take that back to Anne, right? Like it fundamentally, being an organizer, it influences every move you make, every single move. And if we are on the forefront right now and capitalism's knocking at our door and we're strategic about it and we're building coalition and we're thoughtful about it and we're studying and we're like knowledgeable about this money and what we're able to do with it to build our base, yeah, that's a conversation. But like if we're going to be the next, like if February now becomes like the month where like all this promo and like paraphernalia is sold just to like for capitalism to thrive, like, you know, my partner graduates from Harvard Business School this semester, really proud of her. And we have this conversation often. She's bringing it up in her classes. She feels like she lives in two worlds, right? The world that we all live in and like the level of like the Harvard halls. And she's like, babe, I just don't understand. Like we will never, right? And there's a relationship, there's a connection, there always is. And I think us kind of understanding and navigating that as organizers and in coalitions will be able to give our voices more power when the money comes a knocking, because, you know, only we can hold them accountable to what needs to be done. And I second the notion of if they ask you to change who you are, run. And never try to open that door up again.
I would just add that corporate engagement is a mess. And I'm all about reparations. So if you as Lululemon or you as Wells Fargo, for example, Wells Fargo has a horrible history with Black people back to their founding. You know what I mean? All of these big banks do, because they used our body as property, as collateral to start their banks. So when you come back and you're like, we support Black Lives Matter, what I want to see is you acknowledge, and I do consulting with some of these companies sometimes, like big companies, and I tell them, so this is a piece of free game. I tell most of them, like, acknowledge what you did, you know, and then do more, right? It's like when we do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of a Zoom or the beginning of a thing, but then our institution is still built on literal bodies of Indigenous people and sometimes Black people and sometimes Chinese railroad workers. And if we want to get into it, sometimes even some Irish people, right? Like who were indentured, all this, right? But specifically Indigenous people. but you just doing a land acknowledgement, that's not enough. And so for me, it's like, what I want these companies to do is fundamentally shift how they move. I don't actually, at this point personally, I don't actually care if you have a Black CEO or you have enough Black people, Black people in your company. I care about you fundamentally changing how you work for the material conditions of Black people, right? Because you and you being these companies, these corporations, are building off of our labor that was stolen and that still affects us, like, today. And then you're like, oh, we're gonna donate, 5 million when you're a company that makes 3 billion a year. Like, girl, you know what I mean? Like, and that's being generous. They don't even usually donate that much, right? And we saw it last summer with where they're donating. So what I want is, I'm always pro reparations. And so if Lululemon is gonna come to you and they're gonna say, how can we help? And you say, give money to these people, pay these Black trans people's rent, pay for this gender affirming surgery, then cool. I'm gonna take Lululemon's money then. You know what I mean? Like, and that's fine. As long as they're not saying I can't say what I'm saying, then that's it. And what for us who are organizing, who are in the movement, I think it's really important to be transparent and to be honest. Because there are some girls out here, and girls being gender neutral in this case, because often it's actually men who have been like on the low, like saying things. They're like, the easiest example was like DeRay in like 2014, sometime between 2014 and 2016. There's like a tweet he had about Doritos, and there's a tweet he had about like Verizon, and he was like denying that it was like a sponsored one. And maybe it wasn't sponsored, right? But it was like, we do know that with this culture of influencers, the girls are out here, and what they're doing is they'll sneak in a little thing, right? And so like, they will sometimes be like, I'm at a protest, and then it'll be a back shot, right? And then you see their Lululemons, right? Like, and so you're not doing that. I'm just using that as an example, because like, you're like, it's just too staged, right? And but they're trying to make it seem natural. So it's our responsibility to say, this is my money, these are my books. And that's what we see right now with, again, going back to the beginning, the mothers, they're calling out BLM, the national network, to say, where's my money, right? And because they were supposed to receive some money for their children, right? There's for who, and it disappeared, right? Or it was mismanaged, or it was this or that, or, so it's like, where's the money? And who are you giving it to? So yes, no scams. We don't, no.
Thank you.
And can I wrap that up really quickly?
Go
What Ant
ahead.
said? And like, the reason why I think it didn't come across any of our minds is because we all automatically assumed like reparations, like, oh, you give me money, we give back to our communities. Like, we didn't, none of us like double, like none of us kind of like were like thinking of the scam level. So I appreciate you, Ant, for highlighting that, because like, it wasn't in our first initial to be like, oh no, well, let's not go down that dirty road, because none of us kind of thought that, because we were like, reparations for me means reparations for all Black people, all Black lives, and how do we spread that wealth, not realizing that there are those that may not have those best interests at heart. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll now be moving into the future portion of the event. And unfortunately, for the sake of time, this will be my last question before I open up to questions from the audience. But I'm sure Nazak will continue to talk about what the future of Black Lives Matter looks like. So we're college students. Most of the people watching this are college students. Most of them attend UC Berkeley, which a report says that it has the least amount of Black students in the UC system attending their school, and just California as a whole. So what policies, if any, do more college campuses need to enact to better support Black Lives Matter and make college campuses safe and inclusive for Black students?
I'll answer that. Firstly, I believe that the Black students on campus could probably answer that the best. I'm a person who doesn't like to answer for communities that I'm not in, so I'm pretty sure that the Black students at UC Berkeley are organizing and they have specific needs. So make sure that y'all are supporting the Black organizers at UC Berkeley. And then beyond that, I would also say doing more recruitment in Black neighborhoods. I know that there are a low percentage of out of the diaspora, there's a very low percentage of Black American students that attend these elite colleges, and really doing the research and finding out why, and making sure that they're doing more recruitment where it's a heavy Black American population. That's my
I can speak as a Cal alum. I was there as a transfer student from 2013 to 2016. And honestly, where the money reside, where the money reside. Because the thing is, these Black students are organizing, and the demands, if you look at it, there's a great book, actually, if I can find it, I'll mention it later. There we go, hold on. It's called To Fulfill These Rights. And this book talks a lot about how the demands of the last 50 years still haven't been met. If you look at the demands of like Michigan, for example, you know what I mean? The universities of Michigan, and specifically University of Michigan, what Black students are demanding now still matches what they were demanding years ago, 50 years ago. So like, it's a problem, And when I was at Berkeley, the Black recruitment and retention, one of the reasons BRRC exists is because it wasn't happening at the systems level, right? And it's still, as far as I know, is not happening at the level that it needs to, because what ends up happening is the Black students are recruiting and retaining the Black students who themselves are struggling with trying to organize, trying to eat, trying to be a human, trying to take their classes, do all these things, right? So it's like, I saw my friends in undergrad and myself like burn out so quickly, right? So quickly, because we were trying to do it all while also supporting our Black students, like our comrades, our colleagues, our friends. And it's like, money is really where it is. And like, and I think a few years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I might've said, we need this policy change, and we need this policy change. One of the policy changes is we need money. We need money for Black students. We need money for Black American students. And we got like a resource center at UC Berkeley, right? That's one of the things that happened. But how many staff did they actually hire? How many staff did they actually, yes. One of my co-panelists said, open your purse. And that's the thing, like these universities have so much money. I went to community colleges. I went to public schools my whole life. Then I went to UC Berkeley, and then I'm now at UCLA. So I am all up in this University of California system. And what the system needs to do, me being in it, is y'all need to give us more money. Give, and not just to the students, but to the surrounding environments as well, because you put us on these diversity things, you put our faces on it, right? And that's like one of, if you think about it, when I was at Berkeley, it was 3%, I think, Black folks. So I would be in a class of 200 people, and that meant that on average, there was only 6 Black people, and I was one of them. And then 3 of them were student athletes, and then there were 2 others, right? And the student athletes were dope. I'm not like, that's no shade to them, but one of the ways they end up even getting Black students sometimes is by recruiting student athletes. So stop using our bodies, stop using our faces, stop making money off of us. But since you're not gonna do that, at least give us and give them more money. And the last thing I'll say is, like Nayela said, the students at Berkeley now, I'm sure, can speak best to their own interests. But across the university sphere, across campuses, they're never going to be super inclusive in my mind, and that's pessimistic, but they're not. So since they're not, keep working toward it, keep working. But since they're not, open your purse.
My co-panelist took the words out of my mouth. Put your money where your mouth is, right? I went to undergrad at Temple University, some of the best years of my life. I say Philadelphia matured me. And we were in Black and Brown communities. Like, our university was in North Philadelphia, one of the most underserved communities in Philadelphia. And our university and the school itself is a very different space. And so I say, and I also kind of like, I want to evolve the thought of like safe and inclusive, like Ant brought up, right? Like, it'll never be inclusive. But I challenge universities to create brave spaces where Black students and BIPOC students, WBI, POC students feel empowered to say something because they know they'll be heard. Like, it's not just enough to like throw money at the problem, but it's also like to listen and to create those brave spaces where you're going to be challenged by the shit that you're going to be challenged on, and are you willing to receive that, listen, and then actually also invest in the community organized solutions that students bring to the table, because it's their experiences that are going to like shape that. And so I would evolve that thinking and make brave and money-filled spaces for Black students, right? Where they feel like I see a problem, my university trusts me, and what I say like believes me, and then from there we move on and invest to like a solution and kind of growing that. And so I wish I felt more empowered to do that while I was at Temple. Gentrification kind of took over. Unfortunately, the Black and Brown community was pushed out, and to see that happen in real time when I go back now as an alumni, I don't have regrets in life, but I wonder if I had pushed more as an organizer, as an educator at that time in my life, if it would have been different. But yeah, and listen to students. Like, it's very, like, I know there's a balance. I know as an adult, like as a person that ran schools, founded schools, right? Like, I know there's a balance, but my kids would my students, I ran a high school and a middle school, would have all said, Miss Yirga will listen to you. She'll help you understand. She'll listen to you, and she'll always, she's doing what's best for all of us. And if students believe in you like that, and you're creating spaces like that, then that's the evolution of like how Black students can feel more included in the community that is UC Berkeley and any college or college campus.
Thank you so much for answering all of my questions. We're now going to move on to audience questions that have been asked throughout the event. Nazak Wali Ali from the Black Recruitment and Retention Center will be selecting and reading questions from the audience.
Yes, we have some great questions. I just want to again thank the panelists. Y'all's wisdom is just incredible. It's really an honor to get to listen to y'all. So our first question is from, it is anonymous, but the question is, in the past, non-Black people have been criticized for speaking over Black voices about the BLM movement. Can you describe the difference between co-opting the conversation and being a supportive ally?
You should never be in the front. One of the things we say, which I don't know if people do it at other places, but we call out white allies to the back. And if it's a women's march, then anyone who's not a Black woman to the back. So you can support, but you don't need to lead.
And I also, I love evolving people's thinking, and I feel like from the uprisings to now, right? Like spring 2021, it was nice allies, then we had accomplices. I need a co-conspirator. And me and my other co-founders, we use all the time. Like, I need someone who's willing to like dismantle these systems together with me. That is not of color, because we did not create these systems ourselves. We are as a collective struggling through them. And I say that to say, collective struggling through them. I literally lost my thought. It's gonna come back to me in 3, 2, 1. I was talking about, this really got real like intimate.
I think you're more like educating others as they're trying to like get within the movement, and you want to have co-conspirators, not just like allies.
Yes, shout out, thank you.
Okay, I'm glad I got that.
Yes, thank you for bringing it back. I'm a visual learner, so like I look at the question, and so like I didn't have a space to kind of jump back to, but I appreciate that. And so I talk about co-conspirators, and I talk about the ability to always make room for Black voices, Black decisions, in any way that you do, in any way that you move. Prime example, we did a direct action yesterday, and there were Indigenous folks that were kind of like in a debrief, and there was Indigenous folks, and next to me was a white male, cis man, that constantly has been out on the front lines with us and is like family to me. And he just stepped from that space because we were going in a circle, and I instantly felt tingles around my body, right? Because I knew that he made that decision so a Black woman could speak first. I knew that, and I just called him out on, like, I was just like, JJ, I know that's what you did, and like all I saw him was like, you know, like didn't want to acknowledge, like, you know, but I shouted it out. So when you see, as someone who is honoring the space and wants to grow it and cultivate it, I call it out. JJ, I see that you moved so that my Black woman voice could be. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that in this space. And so I thought that was really powerful. It never happened to me in real time. And being able to call somebody out, and his move was like just a nod of like, that's exactly what I did, and I would do it again and again and again. And so I think that kind of builds that evolution of people seeing that it's possible to do that. Because I think people, there's layers to this shit. So people don't even realize that they're doing it for them to be able to be like, let me pass on the mic, because there's like this, oh wow, we're about to get deep. This like grandiose, like right, like when we talk about like white supremacy and like not having the barriers and challenges of people of color, like just assuming this like air of the space around you. And not being able to even acknowledge that as a barrier in itself. So somebody to be that foresight and forward to be like, not only do I acknowledge that, not only do I acknowledge white supremacy, but I acknowledge my role in that as a white cis man. And everything and every decision that I make is encompassing of that within the system, right? And so I say that to say, it's moments like that, right? Those are the examples, and like more of that.
No, that's wonderful. I don't know, Naila, and if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I will just say that one example, so the question was like, can you describe the difference? One example is when I said it earlier, actually, this was based on gender, right? Say her name became say his name and say their names, even though it's created specifically for Black women and Black women who use she, her pronouns in this case. But we also saw it, we saw it when I was on Twitter, I saw it a lot. So like Black Lives Matter was trending, and then all of a sudden people would start saying Brown Lives Matter and other things. And it's like, yes, your lives matter, our lives matter. The topic at hand right now is Black lives, right? Because Black people were the ones being killed at ridiculous rates and so publicly, along with Indigenous people, along with Latinx folks. But you could talk about what you're talking about without also stepping on Black people. And that's the thing. And I remember when I was organizing at Berkeley, it was a trip because we were working on demands and I was like, I played a very small role in this. It was a whole lot of other people, but we were working on demands. And not long after that, the Latino like Alumni Association basically put out a statement that was like, okay, well, the Black people are getting this, but what about us? And it's like, like, you didn't have to bring us into this. You know what I mean? You could just be like, we also want this, right? You didn't have to step on us to do it. And one of the ways I can think about like not co-opting and being a supportive ally, Dr. Kim Tran, she went to Berkeley, graduated out of ethnic studies, and she has a piece on Medium that she wrote last year. It's called A New Knapsack, Unpacking Your Anti-Blackness. And it's based on Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking Your Whiteness and Your White Privilege, right? And in the original, you're thinking about like, oh, what do Band-Aids come in my color, right? That's something that is new for Black people. We didn't used to have Band-Aids that looked like ours. If you ask any dancer, there were not tights or shoes that matched, right? And these are just small things. That doesn't even get into AI and how AI will literally categorize us with monkeys. If you look up Jackie Alcine, Alcine, you can find out more about that. Or how if we put our hands under certain things, right, like a paper towel dispenser, it won't even register it, right? Because they don't do any tests on Black people. And biomedical, I could keep going. My point though, right, is that it goes back to what Naila said, like, you have to know your place, and you have to know that, and know your place not as in like, I'm looking down on you, but know your place as in where do I stand and what am I in this for? Because ultimately, like if I'm out there, right now we're seeing an increase in violence against Asian American folks and Pacific Islander folks. And if I'm out there, right, helping them, I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to follow their leadership, right? I'm not going to be like, okay, well, I'm not gonna bring other things in. And so essentially I'm gonna do what they need me to do. And it has to be the same thing with our movements. You know, if we're talking about Black folks and what's happening to Black folks, then y'all gotta listen to us, right? And then if we say, you gotta go read this, right? If you really about it, then you're gonna go read that, right? Whatever it is. So I think the last thing I'll say is that we really have to question our motivations for doing things, because ultimately anti-Blackness is at the root of so many problems in this country and worldwide. And anti-Blackness only directly impacts Black people. And so although you may be dealing with, you may be a person of color dealing with some things, a non-Black person of color dealing with some things, you don't experience anti-Blackness, right? And so when we're talking about dismantling anti-Blackness, you actually don't have to have an investment in it, right? Because you could walk away from it any day, and particularly white people, right? You can walk away from it any day and it is what it is. So folks who are trying to do the work with us have to consider, what is my motivation for doing this work? And am I really in it to get rid of this stuff? Am I really in it for all of us? And am I really in it? Like, and what does that mean? What do I have to give up? Because there's certain things that I've had to think about in regards to my gender, where it's like, oh, like, am I actually in this for, you know, women, or am I really just trying to do this, right? You know, and like, what is performative and what is this and all that? So yeah, just, we have to ask ourselves the why tree, you know, why are you doing this? I don't know. Why don't you know? I don't know, you know, and you can get down to it. Why are you doing this? I want to help. Why do you want to help? Because what, right? If you ask yourself that and have friends ask each other that, then you really be like, oh, okay. And you learn things about yourself. I've learned things about myself by doing that.
Yes, the intentionality that's there. Naila, I don't know if you want to also respond, but we can also, in the interest of time, move on to the last question, but that's up to you. I can just move on to the last question and, oh, she hopped off. Okay, so yes, in the interest of time, we're gonna do the last audience question. I apologize to folks who didn't get their questions answered, but there's a lot of still great gems. So we've discussed several topics tonight surrounding BLM, but we wanna really root it again in what is next, what are next steps? We know in Black feminist thought, Black radicalism, it's a lot of what is reimagining our conditions. So more broadly, what comes next? What are the next steps? What do you think that is? How do you see the movement progressing?
I see us really building across movement spaces. What Ant kind of was the end of their answer. And it's kind of the beginning to my answer. And talking about like when we're in these different movement spaces, really respecting other oppressed groups because white supremacy, westernization is a world problem. And the war on the poor is real. And it's typically on those that are easily identifiable through their skin tone in various countries. And so like when I'm in an AAPI space, I'm in a indigenous rights space, right? Like we all are like together fighting for liberation. And for me, that is the power. Coming together, building those coalitions across movement spaces. Why is it different now? A lot of people are extremely awake right now, and they're understanding the intersectionalities of our own trauma and the trauma of other movement spaces, and being respectful of that and navigating that. And even within our own movement spaces, we're respecting each other's intersectionality and trying to get to spaces of building, even if you don't like somebody, building towards the goal is always the right thing to do. So my hope is that we continue to build across movement spaces intentionally to fight for Black liberation, but also understanding that it's all rooted in collective action and people power, and what that looks like when we're all together doing that. What does that look like? I'm gonna throw that back to Ant. Maybe you can drop some knowledge on this and we could tag team this one up together.
I love Black people because Beth and I didn't know each other before this. Neither, like, and nor did I know Naela. So it's lovely how we could just, you know, even digitally. What I will say, and I'm gonna try to keep it brief because I can be long-winded, is what I see next is a clearer pathway, which includes Black Lives Matter. It includes all of the hate we've been seeing, the increased hate against Asian folks. Asian is a broad category. And I see that as like white supremacy is the common enemy, and that's what we have to tackle, right? And I see that more of us are recognizing that. And so for a lot of students, that means political education, but that's not just students, right? All of us have to like be reading more, listening more, because we be going out there and we are loud and wrong, you know what I mean? Like, we're not just wrong, we're loud too. And like, and I say we because I have been that too. So the concrete next steps, right, depend on where you are, but I find that folks need to work locally. And if we're all working locally, and it only takes you and one other person, you and two other people, it doesn't have to be a whole organization. You don't have to know what to call yourself. But if we're working against white supremacy, that's when we're really gonna win, you know? And that includes white people too, you know, like it's not just non-Black people. Yeah, and what I'll say is, like, as a PhD student, what am I actively doing to work against white supremacy? Very little. I can tell you that, very little. Like in my daily life, right? Very little, because my daily life is reading and writing. That doesn't mean though that I'm not doing work in other ways, and it doesn't mean that, like, one of the ways I do it is by writing, by consciousness raising, by doing other things. Doesn't always have to be organizing. But like, I'm in a stage in my life where I am dissertating, which means that's taking up so much of my thought space, even if I'm not actually doing the work, although I try to. So when I think about that, we also have to give ourselves grace when I can't be fighting white supremacy every single, I mean, I do, but like, I can't actively be out organizing every single day. And so I've had to reevaluate what that looks like for me. And I think everybody has to recognize for themselves their abilities. And I said I was gonna be short. By white supremacy, the end.
No, please. We love the tangents here. And I do want to give Naela space to also answer the question if she wants to. I was just asking, what do you think is next for the BLM movement? What do you believe are the next steps? How are you imagining the movement as we're going forward? And feel free to answer it or not. Okay. So I just want to thank our speakers again for answering questions from the audience and taking our questions. Just always incredible to hear our Black organizers and scholars share their wisdoms with us. We'll now move on to our final closing statements from the Berkeley Forum President, Aparna Iyer. So off to you.
Thank you all so much for such an incredible event, to the speakers and to our wonderful two moderators. That was really great to listen to. So huge virtual round of applause to all of you. And so at every single Berkeley Forum event, as a token of our appreciation, our communications team designs a custom poster, and this event is no exception. So this was designed for all of you by Thanu Jain from our communications team. So as soon as we're safe and back in person, we'll get that out to all of you. But this is just a show of our appreciation. And at this point, we just want to ask whether you have any quick closing statements just as we bring the event to a close.
Just wanted to shout out Naela, showing like what a real life organizer life looks like. Shout out to Naela, like in between meetings, going to an action, being on the phone, and balancing that with such grace. Just a shout out to her. And shout out to Ant for being such an amazing, scholarly, brilliant person. And I'm so honored to have met them and for bringing us all together. And I hope we continue to, you know, be able to kiki outside the panel.
Last thought is thank you to all the Berkeley Forum. Staff isn't really the right word because y'all are all volunteer. And I remember being at Berkeley, it takes a lot, like, and y'all are doing it in the pandemic. So props to y'all. Props to Beth and Naela for, your words. I agreed with so much of what y'all said. And couldn't, fun fact, earlier, I'll just end with this. Brian emailed me, and Brian and Risa emailed me, and they're like, hey, would you want to do this panel? And I was like, hey, I would only want to do a panel. I don't want to do it by myself, because I thought they were asking me to just speak by myself. Like, I didn't read. And like on Twitter, my catchphrase was y'all don't read. And I had become my catchphrase. I was the y'all who didn't read. So what I'll leave y'all with is please do read, and it's not about what you read and how much you read, but about whatever you're reading, actually read what you're reading. Read for context, read the room. It doesn't matter what well, it does matter, but hopefully it's just not white supremacist propaganda. Read the room, read the books, read the packets, read the Instagram, read the shampoo bottle, and read it correctly so you don't make a fool out of yourself. Because I've done that personally, so on multiple occasions. So thanks for y'all for doing this.
Of course, thanks so much. And Nayela, I know you were having some technical difficulties earlier, but if at any point you do want to say something, just feel free to unmute. But I will just continue. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here tonight. I also want to give a quick shout out to all the people who worked.
Hello?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Okay, I've been trying to be unmuted. I was talking. I finally got it. Thank you, Beth, for your kind words. I definitely would love to connect with both of y'all outside of this. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. And I know you asked the last question of what's next or what's the future. I believe that we should have very specific action items, but based on individual cities, people's needs in Greensboro is not the same as people's needs in Milwaukee, and understanding that local and grassroots organizations work. And if you have funding, then you should, do your best to at least redistribute resources. If you are someone who got $90 billion, and a lot of people did it, and we can't do this work without community building, so continue to deal with your community, and there is power there. And those are my last words.
Thanks so much, Nayela, and to all of you for those amazing closing remarks. Now, like I mentioned, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the people who worked on this event, both from the Berkeley Forum staff and those from BRRC who helped put this together. We're incredibly grateful for all of their work, and we're so glad that we were able to host this event. It's particularly relevant. And really quickly, to our audience members, the Berkeley Forum will be having more events coming up this semester. On the 5th of April, we'll be hosting Sarah Bloom Raskin, the former governor of the Federal Reserve Board. And later on the 8th, we'll be hosting Dr. Ruth Simmons, the first African-American president of an Ivy League institution. So look out for those. And thanks so much for coming out to a Berkeley Forum event. We encourage you to fill out the feedback form at tinyurl.com/forumfeedback spring21. If you have any suggestions for our events or want to suggest any speakers, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, we ask that you like us on Facebook or visit our website, and you can feel free to communicate with us there and see whatever we have going on. And lastly, if you are willing and able, we would love to have you help support us. Our Venmo is linked below, and any amount goes toward putting on more events. Thank you all so much for spending your evening at the Berkeley Forum, and we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you.